The Defiance Protocol. Lieutenant Maya Chen tasted copper in her mouth as she crawled through the narrow maintenance shaft. The tremors from the last bombardment had finally stopped, but a thin layer of metallic dust continued to settle through the fractured ventilation system. Her shoulder throbbed where a piece of shrapnel had sliced through her uniform, but she couldn't afford to stop now. Not with Viridian patrols sweeping every accessible corridor of Nexus Station. Lieutenant Chen, confirm evacuation status. Captain Reeves' voice crackled through her damaged comm unit. The signal was weak, fragmented by interference from the Viridian jamming arrays that had surrounded the station during the initial assault. Maya paused, pressed her back against the cold wall of the shaft, and considered her response carefully. The evacuation order had come 20 minutes ago. The last transport was departing in 5. She had intended to be on it. Still securing critical data, Captain, she lied, watching through a vent as 3 Viridian soldiers marched past. Their exoskeletons hummed with energy, blue light pulsing along synthetic tendons that amplified their already formidable strength. We'll make the extraction point. Another lie. She had no intention of leaving. Negative, Lieutenant. That's an order. The Viridians have breached the central hub. Nexus Station is lost. Get to extraction point, Delta, immediately. Maya clicked her comm unit twice in acknowledgement, then switched it to passive receive only. She wouldn't be needing it anymore. She'd made her decision when she stumbled across the forgotten subsystem access terminal in the damaged engineering bay, when she realized what she could do if she stayed behind. The Viridians had attacked without warning 3 days ago. Their fleet had emerged from jump space and immediately deployed boarding parties. Humanity's most advanced research station had fallen in hours. But they didn't understand what they had captured. They couldn't possibly know about the integrated systems that ran beneath the standard operating grid, the experimental network Maya had helped design but was never officially commissioned. She moved forward through the shaft until she reached a junction node. From her pack, she pulled a small tablet computer, not military issue, but her personal device, modified to interface with the station's maintenance subroutines. The screen flickered as she patched into a local access point. All right, she whispered to herself, let's see what we're working with. The display populated with station schematics, highlighting in red the sections under Viridian control, nearly everything. But the auxiliary systems, the maintenance tunnels, the emergency resource caches, those weren't on standard scans. Those were hers now. A distant explosion rattled the station. The last transport disengaging, she guessed, taking the surviving crew to safety, leaving her alone on a station with approximately 600 Viridian soldiers. The odds made her stomach knot, but there was a cold clarity to her situation now. She wasn't a combat specialist. Her expertise was systems engineering. But systems could be weapons too. Maya crawled forward until she reached a maintenance hub. The cramped circular room contained access panels to 6 different sectors of the station. She pulled herself up and began to work, fingers dancing across a control interface that hadn't been used in months. First, she needed to understand the enemy movements. She diverted power to the obsolete security cameras in Sector 7. Cameras the Viridians wouldn't know existed because they predated the station's last refit. The feed crackled to life, showing a group of soldiers establishing a command post in what had been the main cafeteria. They moved with precision, communicating in short, guttural bursts. Their equipment was sleek, advanced. Everything humanity had feared when intelligence first reported on Viridian technological capabilities. Plasma rifles, energy shields, sensory enhancement arrays. Maya studied them, noting the pattern of their patrol routes, the location of their field generators. She marked the positions of their senior officers, distinguishable by the red pulsing lines on their exoskeletons. So that's what we're up against, she murmured, then turned to a secondary panel. Nexus Station had been built with redundant systems for everything: air, water, power. But the experimental network she'd helped design went further. It could reroute resources in new ways, create unexpected consequences when properly manipulated. The Viridians would expect resistance, perhaps a few hidden crew members, automated defense systems. They wouldn't expect the station itself to become their enemy. Maya's first move was subtle. She adjusted the atmospheric levels in Sector 4, increasing the oxygen content by 8%. Not enough to be immediately noticeable, but enough to make their equipment more vulnerable to electrical surges. Then she introduced a microbial cleaning agent into the central water system, harmless to humans, but it would degrade the synthetic components of Viridian tech over the next 12 hours. She was planting seeds, small disruptions that would cascade into larger problems. A noise from the ventilation shaft made her freeze. The rhythmic thud of armored boots echoed through the metal. A patrol was moving directly above her position. Maya quickly powered down her tablet and pressed herself against the wall beneath an overhanging panel. The footsteps paused. She could hear the hiss of a Viridian breath mask, the click of mandibles that signified their language. They were right above her, separated by only a thin layer of metal grating. Something scraped against the floor. They were checking the access panels. Maya's hand moved to her sidearm. A standard-issue plasma pistol. Not nearly enough to take down a Viridian in combat armor, but maybe enough to buy her a few seconds if discovered. A voice barked what sounded like an order. The footsteps resumed, moving away toward the central hub. Maya released her breath slowly. Too close. She needed to be more careful. And she needed better weapons than just station systems and a pistol. Maya consulted her tablet again, searching the schematics for the nearest armory access. There was one 2 levels down, in a section that showed minimal Viridian presence. She plotted a route through the maintenance tunnels, gathered her gear, and began moving. The journey took nearly an hour. Twice she had to stop and wait as patrols passed nearby. Once she was forced to retreat when she found a tunnel collapsed from structural damage during the initial assault. But eventually, she reached the small auxiliary armory. The door was sealed, emergency lockdown protocols still in effect. Maya bypassed the security with her engineering override codes and slipped inside. The room was small, containing only basic weapons and tactical gear, but it was better than nothing. She selected a tactical assault rifle, extra ammunition, and several compact explosive charges. As she was checking the weapon, her tablet beeped softly. An alert from one of the sensors she placed near the station's main power distribution node. The Viridians were attempting to bypass the station's security protocols to gain control of core systems. "Not on my watch," Maya muttered, slinging the rifle over her shoulder and moving back toward the access shaft. She needed to reach the central engineering bay before they cracked the security measures. If they gained full control of the station's systems, her advantage would be severely diminished. Maya moved quickly, no longer bothering with stealth. Speed was critical now. The route to engineering took her through a section of damaged crew quarters. Half-collapsed walls and shattered personal effects told the story of the station's violent capture. Maya tried not to look too closely at the signs of the life that had existed here just days ago. She was nearly at the engineering bay access point when she encountered her first Viridian patrol. 2 soldiers turned a corner directly in front of her, their weapons raised before they even registered her presence. Their reaction speeds were incredible, just as intelligence had warned. Maya dove behind a collapsed support beam as plasma fire superheated the air where she had stood. The smell of ionized metal filled the corridor. She rolled to her side and fired 3 quick bursts from her rifle. The first rounds deflected off energy shields, but the sustained fire overloaded the defensive field of one soldier. The Viridian staggered back, blue-black fluid seeping from a wound in its armored torso. The second soldier advanced, firing continuously. Maya retreated, ducking into a side corridor. She needed to change tactics. Direct confrontation was suicide. She reached into her pack and pulled out one of the explosive charges, quickly activated it, and tossed it down the corridor. She didn't wait to see the result, already moving toward an alternative route to engineering. The explosion rocked the section, and emergency bulkheads began to descend. Maya slid beneath one just before it sealed completely. Her heart hammered in her chest as she continued moving. The engagement would have alerted others. She had minutes at most before reinforcements arrived. The engineering bay doors were sealed when she reached them. Maya connected her tablet to the access panel and began the override sequence. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked, conscious of every second ticking by. The doors parted with a hydraulic hiss. Maya slipped inside and immediately secured the entrance, engaging manual locks that couldn't be remotely overridden. The engineering bay was dark, emergency lighting casting long shadows across banks of equipment. At the center stood the main control interface, a hub of displays and access terminals that controlled every aspect of Nexus Station. She moved quickly to the primary console and began the sequence to isolate engineering systems from external control. Her fingers flew across the interface, inputting command codes and security overrides. She was racing against Viridian tech specialists who were likely attempting the same access from their command center. A red warning flashed on her screen. They had breached the first layer of security protocols. Maya cursed under her breath and redoubled her efforts, implementing countermeasures she had developed but never had cause to use. The minutes stretched like hours as the silent battle raged through the station's computer systems. Maya exploited backdoors and access points that only the original engineering team would know about. Finally, the display flashed green. She had succeeded in isolating the core systems. The Viridians might control the station physically, but the heart of Nexus was now hers alone. Maya leaned back, allowing herself a moment's relief. Then she began the next phase of her plan. She activated the secondary systems interface and began a station-wide diagnostic. As data flooded her screen, she searched for vulnerabilities she could exploit. The station's communication system caught her attention first. The Viridians had established their own network, piggybacking on the station's existing infrastructure. If she could disrupt their communications, it would significantly hamper their coordination. Maya initiated a targeted electromagnetic pulse through the station's power grid. The pulse was too weak to damage equipment permanently, but strong enough to temporarily disrupt communications in selected sectors. She implemented the sequence, then monitored the results through her security feeds. The effect was immediate. In 3 different sectors, Viridian patrols suddenly stopped, their hand signals indicating communication failure. Officers gestured frantically at their equipment, attempting to restore connections. It was working. Maya allowed herself a small smile as she continued her work, systematically targeting Viridian operations throughout the station. This was only the beginning. One human against an invasion force, but systems were her weapon, and Nexus Station was about to become a battlefield the Viridians never anticipated. As Maya prepared her next move, alarms suddenly blared throughout the engineering bay. On her security feed, she watched as Viridian reinforcements poured into the sectors surrounding her position. They had located her. The hunt had begun. But Maya Chen wasn't running. She was just getting started. The reckoning storm. Commander Vex Krell stalked through the wreckage of what had once been the Viridian command post, mandibles clicking in barely controlled fury. 3 of his elite soldiers lay dead, their exoskeletons shorted out and cooling rapidly. The attack had come without warning, a sudden power surge followed by a cascading failure in the environmental systems. Toxic coolant had flooded the compartment seconds later. "Report," he demanded, turning to his second-in-command. Lieutenant Zara's posture was rigid with tension. "This is the 4th attack in 7 hours, Commander. We've lost 16 soldiers and critical communication nodes in sectors 3, 7, and 9. 1 human," Krell hissed, slamming his armored fist into a damaged console. "1 human is doing this." The initial scans had shown a single life sign remaining after the station evacuation, a fact that Krell had dismissed as insignificant. Now, 3 days later, that single human had systematically dismantled Viridian control of key station systems and eliminated dozens of soldiers. "We've confirmed it's a systems engineer, Lieutenant Chen, according to station records," Zara said, projecting a holographic image from her wrist unit. A human female, dark hair pulled back tightly, eyes that seemed to calculate even from the static image. Specialized in experimental integration networks. Krell studied the image. "She knows the station better than we do. That ends now. Deploy the hunters. Full sensory packages. I want her found and eliminated." As Zora moved to comply, Krell surveyed the damaged command post once more. The human was clever, using the station itself as a weapon. But ultimately, it would make no difference. The Nexus station was the key to controlling this entire sector, and nothing, certainly not a lone human, would prevent the Viridian Imperium from claiming it. Maya slumped against the wall of the small maintenance room she'd converted into her operations center, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her. It had been 3 days since she'd made the decision to stay behind. 3 days of constant movement, of guerrilla attacks followed by rapid retreat. She'd barely slept, surviving on stims and emergency rations, scavenged from supply catches throughout the station. Her uniform was stained with grease, blood, and cooling fluid. The wound on her shoulder had been hastily treated with a medkit, but it still throbbed with each movement. But it was working. The Viridians were increasingly disorganized, their control of the station fractured by her systematic attacks on their communications and support systems. Maya checked her tablet, reviewing the station schematics. The Viridians had adapted to her initial tactics, increasing patrols around critical infrastructure and implementing countermeasures against power surges. She needed something new, something they couldn't anticipate. Her gaze fell on a section of the schematics she hadn't focused on before, the atmospheric control system. Nexus Station had been built with an advanced weather regulation system to support the agricultural research modules. The system could create precise microclimates throughout different sections of the station. It had been decommissioned during the last refit, deemed unnecessary for the station's current research priorities. But the hardware remained in place, dormant but potentially functional. Maya's fatigue receded as she began to formulate a new plan. If she could reactivate the atmospheric systems and gain control of the station's weather patterns, she could create environmental conditions hostile to Viridian physiology without damaging the station itself. She input the commands to run a diagnostic on the dormant systems. Most were operational but would require direct access to the control hub in Sector 12 to reactivate. It was risky. Sector 12 was heavily patrolled, but the potential advantage was worth it. Maya gathered her equipment and prepared to move. As she was checking her weapon, a soft beeping from her security monitors caught her attention. She froze, studying the feed from a camera near her position. What she saw made her blood run cold. 3 Viridian soldiers were moving through the corridor, but they were different from the standard patrols she'd encountered before. Their exoskeletons were sleeker, with additional sensory apparatus extending from their helmets. They moved with predatory grace, systematically scanning every surface and junction. Hunters, elite tracking units, and they were heading directly toward her position. Maya quickly disconnected her equipment, erasing all digital traces of her presence. She had seconds at most before they detected her. The maintenance room had only one exit, directly into the corridor where the hunters were approaching. She glanced up at the ceiling panels, noting the ventilation access above. Too small for the Viridians to follow, but she could just fit. With practiced efficiency, she pushed a crate against the wall, climbed up, and pried open the vent cover. The sound seemed thunderous in the quiet room, but she had no choice. Maya hauled herself into the narrow shaft just as the door to the maintenance room slid open. She froze, not daring to breathe as the hunters entered below. Through the grate, she could see them scanning the room, their sensory arrays pulsing with energy. One looked directly up at the ventilation shaft. Maya's hand tightened on her pistol. If they detected her, she'd have one chance, a quick shot followed by immediate retreat through the vent system. The hunter's gaze lingered on the vent for a long moment, then moved on. Maya remained motionless until all 3 had left the room, continuing their methodical search down the corridor. Only then did she allow herself to breathe again. The encounter had been too close. The hunters would make her previous tactics ineffective. She needed to accelerate her plans for the atmospheric systems. Moving as silently as possible through the ventilation network, Maya navigated toward Sector 12. The route was circuitous, forcing her to backtrack several times when she encountered collapsed sections or active Viridian patrols. Hours later, she emerged into a dimly lit control room. The atmospheric control hub was larger than she expected, a circular chamber filled with banks of dormant equipment. At the center stood the main control console, covered in dust from disuse. Maya approached it cautiously. The risk of triggering alarms was high, but she had no choice. She connected her tablet to the console and began the complex process of reactivating the system without alerting station-wide monitoring. As system after system came online, a map of the station appeared on the main display, showing atmospheric conditions throughout. Maya studied it carefully, noting the concentrations of Viridian forces indicated by subtle changes in temperature and air composition. She began programming a sequence of atmospheric adjustments. The Viridian respiratory system was efficient but sensitive to specific changes in pressure and chemical composition. By gradually altering these parameters in selected sections, she could create zones that would weaken or incapacitate them without being immediately detectable. The process was delicate, requiring precise calculations and careful implementation. One mistake could trigger emergency systems or alert the Viridians to her plan. Maya worked methodically, fingers dancing across the interface as she brought the forgotten weather control system back to life. A soft ping from her security monitor warned her of approaching Viridians. She glanced at the feed. A standard patrol, not hunters, passing through a corridor 2 junctions away. They would pass near her position, but not directly outside. Maya continued working, implementing the atmospheric changes in stages. First, a subtle increase in pressure in Sector 3, where the Viridian command post had been relocated. Then, a gradual shift in oxygen-nitrogen ratios in corridors connecting key strategic points. Finally, she programmed localized temperature fluctuations in areas with high Viridian presence. The effects would be cumulative, initially causing only minor discomfort, but gradually degrading their combat effectiveness. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it would shift the balance further in her favor. As she completed the final sequence, a harsh alarm suddenly blared throughout the control room. Maya's head snapped up, scanning the displays. Something had triggered station security protocols. Not her atmospheric adjustments, but something else. The security feeds showed chaos erupting throughout multiple sectors. Viridian soldiers were collapsing, their exoskeletons malfunctioning. Others were firing wildly at unseen threats. Emergency bulkheads were sealing randomly, trapping patrols in isolated sections. Maya stared in confusion. This wasn't her doing. At least, not directly. Then she understood. The Viridians had been attempting to bypass security to gain full control of station systems, and in doing so, had triggered dormant defense protocols. Her earlier work isolating engineering systems had created a cascade effect, turning the station's automated security against the invaders. She allowed herself a grim smile. The confusion would provide cover for her next move. Maya quickly finalized the atmospheric control sequence, then disconnected her tablet. As she prepared to leave, the main door to the control room slid open. Commander Krell stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 hunters. His armor was more elaborate than the standard soldiers, with pulsing red energy lines indicating his rank. The optical sensors in his helmet focused on Maya with predatory intensity. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, his voice a harsh mechanical rasp through his translator. "You've caused enough problems for one human." Maya raised her rifle, but before she could fire, one of the hunters launched a stasis field. The energy wave caught her, freezing her in place, her muscles strained against the invisible force to no avail. Krell approached slowly, studying her with what might have been curiosity or contempt. Viridian expressions were notoriously difficult to read. "Impressive resistance," he said. but ultimately futile. This station belongs to the Imperium now. Through gritted teeth, Maya managed to speak despite the stasis field. You don't understand what you've captured, Commander. Enlighten me, Krell replied, the translator giving his voice a mocking edge. Nexus Station isn't just a research facility, Maya said, focusing all her energy on maintaining consciousness against the crushing pressure of the stasis field. It's a prototype. Systems within systems, including atmospheric controls you just let me activate. Alarm flashed across Krell's posture. He turned to one of the hunters. Check the console. Now. But it was too late. The atmospheric sequence Maya had programmed was already in motion, and she had added a final command before being captured, an emergency override that would destabilize the entire atmospheric system if tampered with. The first signs were subtle. A change in air pressure that made Viridian auditory membranes vibrate painfully. Then temperature fluctuations that interfered with their thermal regulation. The hunters began to move erratically, their sensory systems overwhelmed by the rapidly changing conditions. Krell staggered, his exoskeleton systems trying to compensate for the atmospheric assault. What have you done? He demanded, mandibles clicking rapidly in distress. Created a storm, Maya replied, feeling the stasis field weakening as the hunter maintaining it struggled to function, specifically calibrated to Viridian physiology. Throughout the station, the atmospheric system was creating localized weather events in every sector with Viridian presence. Temperature spikes, pressure waves, and altered air composition turned the environment itself into a weapon against them. The stasis field collapsed as the hunter generating it fell to his knees. Maya immediately dove behind a console as Krell fired wildly in her direction, plasma bolts melting equipment where they struck. You can't win this, human, Krell snarled, advancing despite the atmospheric assault affecting his systems. Even if you drive us from this station, the Imperium will send more ships, more soldiers. Your resistance is meaningless. Maya activated her tablet remotely, triggering the final phase of her plan. Throughout the station, emergency systems began to cycle. Bulkheads sealed, isolating Viridian forces in small pockets. Life support prioritized areas with human biosignatures, namely, wherever Maya had recently been. Maybe, she acknowledged, firing a precise burst that struck Krell's helmet, cracking his visual sensors. But today, this station is mine. As Krell blindly returned fire, Maya activated the control room's emergency protocols. Coolant gas flooded the chamber, instantly freezing exposed systems, including vital components of Viridian exoskeletons. Krell and the remaining hunter froze in place, their armor locked in position as the specialized coolant solidified around key joints and power conduits. They remained conscious but immobilized, forced to watch as Maya calmly walked past them to the exit. Atmospheric conditions will return to normal in approximately 6 hours, she informed Krell as she passed. That's how long your forces have to evacuate before I initiate the station's self-destruct sequence. And yes, that's one system I made sure you can't override. It was a bluff. The station had no self-destruct, but Krell couldn't know that. Maya paused at the doorway, looking back at the immobilized Viridian commander. Next time, Commander, remember that sometimes the most dangerous thing in a system isn't what you can see. It's what was built in from the beginning. With that, she disappeared into the corridor, already planning her next moves. She would continue her campaign, targeting Viridian ships docked at the station, disrupting their ability to call for reinforcements. Eventually, humans would return with a counter-offensive force. Until then, Maya Chen would ensure that the Viridians never truly controlled Nexus Station. As she moved through the corridors, now empty of Viridian patrols fleeing the atmospheric assault, Maya allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. She was one human against an invasion force, outgunned and outnumbered. But she had turned the station itself into her ally, a weapon more powerful than any plasma rifle or battle cruiser. The Viridians had come expecting to claim an empty research station. Instead, they had found that humans never truly surrendered, and that sometimes resistance came from where you least expected it. In the command center, Krell watched through damaged optical sensors as his forces began emergency evacuation procedures. The station that was supposed to be the Imperium's foothold in this sector was slipping from his grasp, undone by a single human who had refused to follow evacuation orders. Maya Chen made her way to the observation deck and watched as Viridian shuttles desperately launched from docking bays, fleeing the station that had become their nightmare. She wasn't naive. They would return, possibly with a larger force. But she had proven something vital, that humanity's strength lay not just in its technology or numbers, but in the ingenuity and determination of even a single individual who refused to surrender. She activated her long-range communicator, finally ready to send a message to the evacuated human forces. "This is Lieutenant Maya Chen on Nexus Station, area secure. Requesting pickup and reinforcements." She paused, looking out at the retreating Viridian ships. "And tell Command we're going to need engineers. I have some ideas for upgrading our defenses."